Howdy there. I'm Denver and Rio Grande Western Rail fan, and today I'll be taking you on a tour of one of the most significant mining towns in the beautiful Colorado San Juan Mountains, called Eureka, that just over 100 years ago was bustling with mines that were pumping out millions of dollars worth of ores. But while extensive riches were brought out of the mountains surrounding the town, it also furthered the magical and legendary history of mining, and we can still experience and marvel at the remains of what was once the home of one of the most prosperous mines in all of Colorado. How was this town and mine founded? What hardships did they suffer through? And what led to their demise? Together we will discover the answers to those questions and find out what makes the town of Eureka and the Sunnyside Mine so special. The story of Eureka began in 1860, when a man named Charles Baker and his group of prospectors discovered traces of placer gold at the future townsite of Eureka. However, the Ute tribe of Indians had already been awarded the land in a treaty with the United States government, and in 1861 the prospectors were forced to leave. In 1871, however, they returned when lode gold was uncovered in the Little Giant vein at Arastra Gulch near Silverton. The miners were allowed to stay after the Utes ceded 3.7 million acres of land to the U.S. government in the Brunot Agreement, which went into effect on September 13, 1873. In exchange for handing over 3.7 million acres to the Americans, the Southern Ute Indian Reservation received an annual payment of $25,000. It was at this time that the Sunnyside Mine claim, situated close to Lake Emma, was created. The Sunnyside claim, at the head of Eureka Gulch and on the north side of the Animas River, was organized by two men named Reuben McNutt and George Howard. To allow their claims to be officially recognized, they organized the Eureka Mining District. Multiple other mining claims were staked as well. Throughout the rest of 1883, McNutt built the first log cabin in Eureka, and other prospectors quickly joined him and founded the mining camp that would become Eureka. The camp took Eureka as its name because in Greek, Eureka means "I have found it." Speculators began to assume that the camp would emerge into a formal settlement and decided to form the Eureka Townsite Company and platted a townsite. To protect the town from avalanches, it was constructed in the middle of two mountainsides. Due to being out prospecting like the rest of the mining camp's dwellers, the founders barely did anything to convince businesses and residents to settle in Eureka. McNutt bought Howard's share of the Sunnyside property and began to develop the mine in 1874. Prospectors staked additional segments of the vein, such as the Sunnyside Extension on the other side of Hanson Peak. In 1875, a post office was established at Eureka, and the following year a married couple named Milton and Emma Thompson Englemen arrived from Canyon City, Colorado, and opened a mercantile store. Milton purchased half an interest from McNutt in the Sunnyside Mine, whereas Emma bought interest in the George Washington and Poughkeepsie No. 2 mines, which were located close by. It just so happens that Lake Emma was named for Emma Englemen. Another interesting fact about Eureka is that it was one of the only towns in the area to stay open throughout the winter. Milton and Emma had hardly any money left to develop their claims, but they were still able to hire miners who began transporting ores from shallow mine workings. In the late 1870s, to develop the mines, Milton offered interest in the property to his in-laws for capital. Him and his in-laws, Frank and Louise Thompson, who just like him were from Canyon City, bickered over control, profits, and ownership. Therefore, when Milton was informed that miners had struck some very rich gold ore in the Sunnyside mine, he stockpiled it instead of selling it because his and his wife's relationship with the Thompsons had become very sour. In 1883, Milton made the decision to hire a man named John H. Terry to both manage his mining operations while at the same time to build a mill at the Sunnyside Mine, circa Lake Emma. Terry had previously worked at some of the mines and mills in Gilpin County, Colorado. For the most part, the Englemens used the profits from the mill to fund their legal problems. In 1889, construction began on another new mill about a mile west of Eureka. It was constructed because Terry was unhappy with the inefficiency, small capacity, and the remote location of the stamp mill at Lake Emma, causing him to ask Milton to fund this new one. It was completed in 1890 and came to be known as the Midway Mill. A small hydropower plant was installed at the mill, which gave it electricity. Thanks to this new mill, production at the Sunnyside Mine was able to increase, and throughout the decade, several new tunnels were driven into the mountainside to reach unattained ores. Terry would have to wait until 1896 to install a tramway, when capital reserves had replenished enough to do so. Without the tramway, a herd of pack animals was required to bring the ore down the mountain to the mill. About a year later, in 1891, Milton Englemen passed away, causing his family to sell the mine and mill to Terry. When he bought the mine and mill, he quickly began to make improvements, but his progress was slowed by the silver crash of 1893. In 1895, Terry discovered a rich vein and began to pay off all of his standing debts and to buy out other investors' holdings in the Sunnyside Mine so that he could become the sole owner of it. And by 1896, Terry felt that he was financially secure enough to construct a tramway from the Sunnyside Mine to the Midway Mill to replace the expensive mule trains that had previously run between them. While all of this was happening, some New York investors made Terry an offer to buy the Sunnyside Mine for $450,000, with payments being made over time in a $100,000 advance. Terry accepted the offer, and the investors immediately built a new mill at Eureka, overhauled the Midway Mill, and made various other improvements. Not very long after this, however, the miners lost the vein and, due to fear of any further loss, allowed the property to return to Terry's ownership. In 1895, a man named Otto Mears, along with other Coloradan capitalists, incorporated the Silverton Northern Railroad and began to build a line from Silverton north up the Animas River. The company decided to use Mears' Animas Forks toll road as the rail bed and began construction. The workers who constructed the line labored in between snowstorms during the winter and completed the line to Eureka in June 1896. The Silverton Northern connected to the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad at Silverton, which massively reduced the financial cost of transportation. It should be noted that the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad would later be reorganized as the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad in 1920. The Silverton Northern also offered passenger service, which was useful because it allowed the miners and mill workers to be able to live at Silverton. Mears also founded two other Colorado railroads, the Rio Grande Southern and the Silverton Railroad. Many authors say that he founded the Silverton, Gladstone, and Northerly Railroad as well. However, it was actually the owners of the Gold King Mine and Mill, located in Gladstone, who founded it. However, Mears did end up owning the railroad later in his life. Between 1896 and 1897, Terry's miners found a very rich vein and produced so much ore that Terry had to run not only the Midway Mill, but also the original mill on Lake Emma. He proceeded to begin work on what is known as either the Eureka or Terry Mill, as well as its tramway and a power plant, thanks to the $100,000 advance from the New York investors. Infrastructure was built at the mine along the shores of Lake Emma that included boarding houses, shops, and other mining buildings. In 1889, the new Eureka/Terry Mill commenced operations, and in 1904, the Silverton Northern Railroad extended its lines to Animas Forks. Also by this time, Mr. Terry had taught his two sons about mining operations. His son Joseph mainly managed the Sunnyside Mine, while his son Williams managed the mills. In 1910, their father, John Terry, passed away, but nevertheless they continued on. The year after that, in 1911, Williams enlarged and refitted the Eureka Mill with a zinc ore separator, which was able to increase its operations. At the same time, Joseph Terry was managing a workforce of 90 workers producing 180 tons of ore each and every day, which was double the usual average per worker. In 1917, the American Smelting and Refining Company, abbreviated as ASARCO, offered to buy the Sunnyside Mine from the Terrys. The company also bought out other mines in the area to maintain long-term reserves. The Sunnyside, Washington, and Gold Prince groups were consolidated to create the Sunnyside Mining and Milling Company. ASARCO formed plans to build another mill at Eureka that could treat 500 tons per day, as well as to finish driving the Terry Tunnel from the mill site to undercut the vein system at great depth underground. Soon after the company bought these mines, multiple troublesome problems arose. The Sunnyside surface plant burned down, which forced the Sunnyside mine to temporarily close. The influenza pandemic of 1918, along with avalanches and loads of power blackouts, occurred. Nevertheless, the Sunnyside Mill was soon completed at Eureka, the surface plant was rebuilt, and the mine complex was expanded to be able to house 220 workers. Lots of workers began to occupy the available housing in the town, which provided business opportunities for local merchants. Shortly after the Sunnyside Mill was completed in 1918, the town achieved a population of about 250 people. The town was home to multiple mining companies, assayers, and boarding houses, while also hosting a barber shop, a doctor whose name was William Carter, the Eureka Hotel and Restaurant, the Warnock's Mercantile, McJunkin Station that had both feed and fuel available for purchase, as well as A.L. Lashbaw's Livery and C.F. Warden's Billiard Hall. But unfortunately, a national recession hit in 1920, causing the price of industrial metals to drop so drastically that once again, operations at the Sunnyside Mine were suspended. 2 years later, in 1922, the mine was able to reopen, with 216 men working there along with 500 tons of ore being processed every day. By the next year, the company reached a new height of 360 men in its workforce after it had begun to develop adjoining claims. In 1928, the Great Depression began to ravage the world's economy, causing the Sunnyside to once again suspend work 2 years later in 1930, and it would remain closed until 1937. The Sunnyside Mining and Milling Company was actually Colorado's biggest producer of gold when it reopened that year. However, in 1939, the company laid off its workforce and shut down the mine for good, because the accessible ore reserves were almost all gone. During its existence, the town of Eureka had mostly comprised of miners from the Sunnyside Mill as its residents. As soon as the mine shut down, the town began to suffer massively. The Silverton Northern Railroad had removed its tracks from Eureka to Animas Forks in 1936, and in 1939, it ceased operations on its Silverton to Eureka segment of the line. 3 years later, the railroad tore up all of its tracks. During its final years of operation, the railroad used a rail car called the Casey Jones, which was owned by the Sunnyside Mill and loved by the miners. It was designed and built sometime around 1915 by a man named Clyde Jones. Unlike Eureka and the Sunnyside Mine, the Casey Jones has survived, and you can still see it in Silverton along with lots of other old freight cars and of course the legendary Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railroad. The Sunnyside Mill shut down in 1941, and the Eureka post office closed a year later. In 1948, the mill facilities were sold for scrap, and by this time, the town was completely abandoned and consisted solely of empty buildings, reminding visitors of a bygone mining age that once promised millions the opportunity to strike it rich and to see the beauty of the world. 11 years later, in 1959, the Marcy-Shenandoah Company leased the Sunnyside from ASARCO. From the Gold King Tunnel at Gladstone on the other side of Bonita Peak, towards the Washington and Sunnyside veins under Lake Emma, the Marcy-Shenandoah Company drove the American Tunnel. The company was then purchased by the Standard Metals Company, who chose to continue driving the tunnel. Whenever ore was discovered at the tunnel in Gladstone, it would be transported by truck to Silverton, which at the time, and up until 1991, was still a major mining town. In 1970, due to going bankrupt, the Standard Metals Company ceased work at the American Tunnel. However, work was continued by the Washington Mining Company. By this time, some very valuable workings were pinpointed underneath Lake Emma and began to get mined out. In time, there were only 90 feet separating the lake and the underground mining tunnels. A leaking fault was discovered in the mine shafts under the lake during the winter of 1977 to 1978. Experts came to believe that the distance between the lake and the mine was safe, which was unfortunately not the case. At about 6:50 p.m. on Sunday, June 4th, 1978, the lake broke through into the mine shafts. It dumped all of its contents into them, which has been estimated to be about 500 million gallons of water and mud. The rapid and destructive rush of water blew out of the 1-mile-long Terry and 2-mile-long American tunnels. Water flowed out of the portal of the American Tunnel at Gladstone in 8 to 10 foot long waves, carrying mine timbers and equipment, as well as tons of debris. The water was so powerful that it flattened a 20-ton Plymouth locomotive that was parked below the main ore pass, but the mine was always closed on Sundays and nobody was inside working at the time, thus avoiding any loss of life. If it had happened on any other day, however, 125 men could have possibly been killed. To protect from future disasters, the tunnels were filled to the top with mud, and in order to repair the damage dealt, the mine was shut down for 2 years. It had previously been insured for $900 million, but the insurance company initially refused to pay for any and all damages, but was later forced to pay $5.5 million after an expensive court battle. However, the Sunnyside was never again able to reclaim its profitable status and closed in January 1985. Later on, in a joint venture, Echo Bay Mines Ltd. and Alta Bay Mines leased the Sunnyside and placed it back into production. The mine was then sold to a subsidiary of the Canadian mining powerhouse Kinross Gold called the Sunnyside Gold Corp., who were unsuccessful at making it profitable again. The mine closed for the last time in July of 1991. During its lifetime of 118 years, the Sunnyside produced over 7 million short tons of ore and became Colorado's largest operating gold mine. It didn't just produce gold, it produced silver, copper, zinc, and lead. Since its closure, every single part of its mining area has been reclaimed by plugging the many tunnels as well as by other means. Reclamation has proven to be so expensive that the cost of it has been more expensive than all of the mine's profits in its 118 years of existence combined. Most of the buildings in Eureka have been torn down either to avoid taxes or due to the harsh elements of nature. What remains of the town is the Sunnyside Mill's foundations on the hillside, a few remains of the Silverton Northern Railroad tracks, parts of old buildings, a single small rebuilt building, a store called Eureka the Miner and Prospector Store, and finally, the Eureka Campground. You can also travel up above the hill where the Sunnyside Mill is located and take the road to the bowl where Lake Emma once was. Along the way, you will see some remains of the Sunnyside Mine, such as a tram station. In case you're interested, in this video's description, there is a link to a site called 4x4 Explore that covers these remains in more depth and also talks about the history of the town. There are multiple other towns, some abandoned and some not, surrounding Eureka. Silverton is located about 7.5 miles from Eureka. While traveling from Silverton to Eureka, you will find the ghost town of Howardsville, which was established in 1874. It was the first county seat of La Plata County, a position that it held for only a year, until 1875, after it lost that privilege to Silverton. The town was abandoned about the same time as Eureka after its post office closed down in 1939. What remains of Howardsville today are a few cabins, some abandoned and some not, and some old mines and mills surrounding it. The famous Old Hundred Mine is located a little outside of the town. In between Howardsville and Eureka is a small abandoned town called Middleton. Very little is known about this town, but I believe the first claim in the town was made in 1883 by two men named Gottlieb and Conecker. As Howardsville and Eureka grew bigger over the years, they attracted Middleton's residents and the town eventually died. Probably the most famous ghost town near Eureka is Animas Forks, which was established in 1875 and was the end of the line for the Silverton Northern Railroad. Like many Coloradan towns back in the day, it was a mining town, but survived mainly on speculative investment rather than productive mining. Nevertheless, it was the site of mines and mills like the Gold Prince and Frisco mills. The town suffered from major fires in 1891 and 1913, which destroyed many of its buildings, and it became a ghost town sometime around the 1920s. You can still visit the town along the Alpine Loop Scenic Byway and see none of the town's houses that have survived over the years. And of course, you can always visit the nearby town of Silverton, which is the terminus of the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. There are lots of mines and mills surrounding the town, and if you drive along the $1 Million Highway from Silverton to Ouray, you will find even more small mines and mills, but also large ones like the Idarado mine. Right next to the Idarado, you can also see the remains of Red Mountain Town, where there are 4 abandoned portable mining houses that used to be stationed in Eureka, but were later transported to their current location in 1948 by being hauled behind a red 1946 Dodge truck. These houses actually have an interesting history, which I covered in this video here. Link is in the description. On a side note, to me, these mines, ghost towns, and railroads are such an important part of our history, and when you visit these places, you get taken back to the past, and it makes you appreciate what the people who founded and worked these things accomplished, and their legacy is something that will last years into the future. Yeah, Mining, railroading, and the towns that sprang up around them left quite a legacy now, didn't they? Many towns throughout the United States were originally just mining camps or railroad stops. Mining and railroads gave millions of people a chance at striking it rich, going on adventures, or just seeing the world. And today you can still see these abandoned mines, ghost towns, and railroads, and experience the country as it was then, raw, untamed, rugged, and beautiful. I'm Denver and Rio Grande Western Rail fan. Thanks for watching.